So I'm very pleased to welcome Sarah Menkedick here to speak tonight. Sarah spent her 20s traveling the world, writing articles and essays, teaching English and living in Mexico, China, the Indian Ocean, and elsewhere. She couldn't imagine any other type of life than the adventure of the open road and the thrill of figuring out where to next. Yet all that changed when she returned with her husband to her family's farm in rural Ohio to become a mother. In this brilliant collection of essays, Homing Instincts, Sarah ruminates on those years before and after birth, what it means to actually want to be home again, drawn to one place in the idea and identity of family, which used to seem so alien. Homing Instincts has been called superb storytelling, poignant with a remarkable sense of place. So please join me in welcoming Sarah Menkedick to Politics and Prose.
All right. Hi, everyone. How's the sound? Good? All right. Excellent. So thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful summer evening to listen to this little talk and reading. My husband and I are spending our first 2 days ever away from our child. So woo, hurrah for that. Very exciting. I also want to thank Politics and Prose because one of the number one things I've learned in this publishing process is just how important independent bookstores are for authors. So support your indie bookstore. Really critical. So I'm just going to give a brief talk about how the book came to be and also about how it has made me really passionate about seeing motherhood as a creative subject. And then I'll do a brief reading and then you all can give me your questions. All right, great. So the book really begins on a snowy winter day, walking through the Ohio woods with my dad. I had just emerged from the first major depression of my life, which crashed down on me along with all the pandemonium of the first trimester of pregnancy. I was terrified. I had no clear model for what came next, as a woman, as a mother, as a writer. My dad, wise man that he is, said, well, hey, maybe your first book will finally come out of it. And here we are. So when we talk about partners, we often talk about knowing. Oh, I just knew. I definitely talked this way about Jorge when we first met, explaining to my parents why I was moving to China with a Oaxacan man I'd met just 6 months before. Bless them, they did not panic, even when we sent them photo cards of us jumping on top of a Chinese peak with the all-caps caption beneath, "We're getting married!" And here we are, 10 years later. I just knew. With a book, the knowing is similar. I had worked on 2 long projects before my book. One, a critique of travel culture that ended up being published by Amazon's Kindle Singles. The other, a sprawling travelogue about Mexico and migration that ended up as a feature for Harper's. They were fascinating projects, but I could tell right away that this book was different. I wrote it from the gut. In the New York Times, the writer and poet Sarah Manguso wrote, "Writers must labor from a vague feeling, usually some large, old emotion, and in so laboring, come to understand the qualities of that feeling and the source of it and the reason they still feel it." I had never written this way before. I had always privileged intelligence above all. I wanted my work to be smart. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to emulate the very male styles of success I saw when I worked at a magazine in New York. I wanted to prove my craft and my skill and my thinking. And then with this book, I let all of that go. I wanted to figure out how to be a person in the world. I wanted to figure out what it means to become a mother. Because for all of the literature we have about how to sleep train our babies and how to micromanage their emotions and how to pump them full of superfoods, we hear so little about what it means for a woman to go through one of the most epic transformations of her life. What does it mean for herself? What does it mean to, in many ways, eradicate the self, to have to conjure it anew, or to let go of it entirely? I had long thought of writing as the twin pursuit of travel. To travel and to write were to see. For Homing Instincts, spending my days in a tiny 19th century cabin in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, I trained that traveler's lens on pregnancy and early motherhood. This, too, is a journey, but one that has so often been marginalized, trivialized, and shut out of the realm of literature for both deliberate and unconscious reasons. For me, the urge to write my way through that journey was deeply personal. I needed to make sense of the unfamiliar depths of love and fear that characterized those early years. It wasn't until the book was published that I became passionate about writing motherhood. I kept having this conversation. People would ask me what my book was about, and I'd say motherhood, and they, without fail, would say something like, "Oh, that's nice." I started to realize that motherhood was code for femaleness, and femaleness was code for cute, insignificant, and trivial. I wrote an op-ed about this for the Los Angeles Times that generated a surprisingly enormous response. I explored how women writers are often punished for writing about the traditionally feminine, and why so many women are wary of writing about birth and motherhood, even when these are some of the most profound, challenging, complex experiences of many women's lives. So part of my goal in talking about homing instincts and my next project is to advocate for motherhood as a worthwhile creative subject. I want to encourage artists to explore it without hesitation. If we train our vision on it, I want to say, we'll make it compelling. We'll bring it the depth and critical attention it deserves. 41 years after the publication of Adrienne Rich's Of Woman Born, her central observation holds startlingly true. She wrote, "We know more about the air we breathe, the seas we travel, than about the nature and meaning of motherhood. In the division of labor according to gender, the makers and sayers of culture, the namers, have been the sons of the mothers." This has also been the goal of my magazine, Vela, to challenge the notion that certain subjects are feminine and therefore inferior, less important, less serious, and also to give women writers the platform to write about whatever they want without adhering to the often very narrow male styles of the mainstream publishing world. Vela exists as a space where women can write motherhood and can also write about chronic illness or Whitney Houston or poverty or Wall Street. And what matters isn't their gender or the subject or its presumed seriousness, but the power of the writing itself. So on that note, I am going to read from one of my favorite parts of the book, which is the birth scene, because I wonder how many of you have ever sat through a birth scene before. And we'll have a birth tonight in Politics and Prose to mix it up. During the most annihilating, intense pain of my life, I am expected to breathe deeply and open myself like a tulip. In birthing classes, the nurse warns us that she's seen many women who wanted to do natural childbirth clamp up with anxiety at the pain and end up needing analgesics or an epidural. The pain starts at 1 a.m. on June 4th, and at first, it's a curiosity. I actually think, oh, this is what a painful contraction feels like. The pain is unlike the low, swampy throb of period cramps, unlike a bellyache. It radiates, starting at a center point and then undulating outward like the rays on a sketched sun, before those rays turn back and clench down on my whole torso for an excruciating 5 to 10 seconds. It is still an exciting novelty while I stuff granola bars in a duffel bag, while we climb into the Honda in the thick of night and start with a crunch down the gravel drive, giddy nervousness giving me goosebumps. Heavy fog shawls the pastures, and the fireflies shine through it like bioluminescence. From here onward, every time I see fireflies, I will think of this night. Will remember the wing of the car door open in the driveway, the pulse of gold through the mist, the pain and the brink. Stepping off the cabin porch, easing my animate belly into the front seat, I have a vertiginous sense of the threshold. When I return, I will have a baby, The wormhole to this life of pregnancy and pre-parenthood will have finally closed completely. On the 2-hour drive into the hospital, in the triage room, and even making my way down the hall to the delivery room, I can separate myself from the pain, see it at a distance. Its intensity is observed and noted. In fact, I note that my sharp, ragged breaths and long, shuddering exhales sound exactly like my grandmother's when she was dying. I suck on a purple popsicle and then have to go to the bathroom immediately to expel it. Meg shows up, touches my belly, and hugs me. Mom shows up and hands me a black and white cloth box with a stuffed bunny and a monkey rattle and onesies. My sister takes blurry pictures of my face raw with emotion. And Jorge, as he does, weathers it all, grinning and letting me squeeze the life out of his hand. There is laughter, banter, little waxy cups of water. But shortly after we enter the delivery room, Mom and my sister and Meg and Jorge and Bent shuffling me, arriving in a happy pack with the midwife and the nurse, there is a shift. The last thing I remember thinking is, how in the world did my sister compare this to running a marathon? I half laugh and then am swept under. The pain takes me like a riptide and leaves only the barest shred of conscious experience. I double over, clutch at myself. I clench my teeth and my muscles. I bark, ow, 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 involuntarily, as if the words are being yanked from me like flopping fish from water. The midwife says, say open, not ow. Open. Desperate, I say it. Open, open, open. Each time it comes out a little calmer than the last, the O sound releasing breath. I breathe audibly, slowly, through the contractions. They measure me and my dilation is 4 centimeters, the same as when I arrived. At this moment, I understand that I must make my peace with labor or I'll never make it. I strip down to a bikini, shuffle doubled over to the bathroom with the birthing ball, and keel over said ball in the shower for the next 3 hours, rocking and moaning. In these hours, I am nothing but pain and a vessel. I close my eyes and envision riding the contractions like waves, rising in increasing pain to the searing crest, holding there with forced breathing for the 10 or 15 seconds of peak intensity, then breathing my way down as they recede. Jorge's jeans are rolled up at the ankles, and his bare, brown feet are the only thing I see. They are tender and beautiful even in this agony. I notice and remember this. I open. I move into transition and the contractions become unbearable. I stumble to the bed, lie on my side, and kick, screaming, ow, 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 like machine gun fire. I am at this moment seeing only snippets of faces, hearing my sister say, you're doing so good, and Jorge saying, you're doing amazing. The midwife asks if I want to start pushing. I say yes, not really hearing my own voice. And then I am pushing my feet against my sister and Jorge's palms with all my strength. I begin to shout guttural, primeval sounds over and over, which feels good. The midwife interrupts. Sarah, she says, you can roar your baby out. But right now, you're not doing any work. You have to bear down. I've been evading the pain with all my noise. I am silent, internalizing all that energy, and then I bear down. For the first time, I feel an enormous wall of pressure, a discomfort unlike anything I've experienced, as I try to free this other body from my own through a very small space. I bear down until it seems I am near exploding. When each contraction ends, some meager sliver of self-awareness returns, and I pant, cry a little, then feel the building of another contraction and bear down again. At some point I wail, I can't do this anymore. And Meg leans in and says, you are doing it. I bear down again and again. Look at all that hair. And a cry, and there is a head with full black hair. One more push, and she is out, incarnadine and screaming. The midwife raises her quickly to my chest, and I am in shock, half laughing, saying, my baby, my baby. And she looks up at me with dark eyes. I am surprised at their darkness, their differentness from my own. They are little shimmering opals. She is wet and ruddy and completely herself, and I am ecstatic, startled, touching her tiny hands and feet. It is 2:51 p.m. Outside, it is raining. It is not until a few weeks after the birth, when I am fully immersed in milk and sun and poo, summer and new motherhood, that I see this is what I've been trying to do all along. Open, open, open. The shedding of self is painful. The urge is to seize up against it, hold tighter and tighter to the old givens, but eventually it will only get harder and harder, the passageway narrower and narrower. Instead, I have to let go, open. Above all, to not knowing who I am, where I'm going. Thank you. All right, so if when you recover from that, feel free to just fire away.
So how many hours of total labor, Sarah?
12, beginning to end, so fairly standard.
Well, you mentioned at the beginning that either consciously or unconsciously, women's motherhood literature has been seen as lesser than.
Mm-hmm.
So was it hard pitching your book or no?
Actually, it was surprisingly easy. I mean, I had, several sort of failed projects before this one. And I thought with this one, I really didn't care. I wasn't thinking at all about selling it. I just wrote it because I needed to write it. And it went fairly quickly. And I think because I sort of made the case that we're coming into a new age of a golden age of writing about motherhood. I really think there's been so much phenomenal work about motherhood in recent years. So I think that there's like a renewed interest in that now. And women are also having much more of a dialogue around, the literature of motherhood and the literature of domestic life and whatnot, and how women are writing that now and how that's been perceived and portrayed and whatnot. So I think my book came at the right moment for that, fortunately. Yeah, thank you.
We discussed this a little bit beforehand, but do you think you want to stick with writing about motherhood now as sort of your subject, or what is next? What other projects you have in mind? What other topics you want to write about?
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm sort of an odd one in that I write a lot, I have been writing a lot about motherhood. I also write a lot about Mexico and immigration, which are somewhat separate subjects. But I am working on a new book now about actually fear and anxiety, and particularly the problem of anxiety in pregnancy and postpartum, which I think is a huge sort of underdiagnosed issue affecting many mothers today. So that book will be much more research-based and sort of narrative nonfiction, but that's what I've been working on now. So I'm going to inhabit this space of motherhood for sure for the next couple of years while doing other work for magazines and different reporting projects and whatnot. But I am, I think a lot of women writers feel the need to sort of like scurry out of that space as quickly as possible for legitimate reasons, because it's easy to get sort of pigeonholed there. So I want to hold strong there for a little while longer, because I think there's just so much that needs to be done in that space. So, yeah.
So after hearing that, I don't know if I want to read it or not anymore.
Oh, no. That's the most traumatic scene probably, and it has a happy ending.
So with the first year, tell us what was the hardest part after giving labor?
I think the hardest part was not doing anything, like learning how to not be looking towards the next step in my life, or, what I was planning or where I was going. I'd always been really ambitious and seeking like, I need to move here and I need to do that and I need to apply for this and I need to go to school here. And I think probably the hardest thing, but also the most rewarding thing from the first year was learning how to not look ahead, how to just sort of be there and appreciate being there. And that was a major shift for me, and I still struggle with it, but it's worthwhile. Yeah. Thank you.
So congratulations on the book and
Thank you.
the birth.
Thank you.
So as a writer and a mother and all that entails, which is a lot, tell us about how you find time to write and run all the things that you do in your life.
Yeah,
So-
that's a good question. Yeah. So, I mean, I wrote this book essentially in like 3 to 4 hour spurts in an old barn, my parents' land. We were, my husband and I were living there, and we lived there sort of on and off for the year of my pregnancy and then the year afterwards. And that was very nice because we lived in a tiny ancient cabin, so we didn't have to worry about like big city rent and those kinds of questions. So we just sort of did our freelance work and lived from that, and then I carved out whatever time I could in that space. And actually, we've sort of kept doing that. Both of us are freelancers now, so we've just sort of trade off. And I've been very fortunate that I have a partner who is, shares the childcare and the domestic work and all of that. And so we just sort of, our lives and schedules and hours are changing all the time. But basically, this book was written in all the like increments of time that I could carve out in that first year and beyond. So, thanks.
Hi, Sarah. So I have to apologize because I was the jerk in front of you in line at the bathroom earlier who was checking her emails and didn't get out of the way
I didn't even
fast enough. Hi.
So we know each other from the internet, sort of.
Hi.
Yeah.
Nice to see you. So I have a question, and sorry, this column is super weird. For other people who haven't read your book, you talk not only about sort of the perceived seriousness of feminine writing, but also about sort of your transition from being kind of a young 20-something into your 30s, and kind of how the subject matter that you focused your writing on changed. And I was really struck, just finished your book today. I was like, I have to finish it before I get there. But I was really struck by how you described that transition, about how you started looking from experiences outside you to experiences inside you. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. It's still relevant to the excerpt that you read this evening as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question, and there's so much to that. And I think a lot of my background as a writer was as a literary journalist, and in an MFA program that really privileged literary journalism, which was a great thing. But I think that, in terms of like nonfiction culture more widely, there is a sort of preference for that more journalistic narrative writing. And I think there's long been, sort of a conversation about personal writing and the significance of personal writing, and personal writing tends to be viewed as easier or less serious or less important. And I think I had really internalized that from my experiences as a younger writer and from my work experiences and my MFA. And so, for work to be serious, it needed to be journalism, or it needed to be, it needed to not have the I in it. And then with this book, for the first time, I was sort of blown away by how complicated and intense the transition to motherhood is, which is shocking because you would think, that's something that women would understand. But I just think there has been so little writing about that I was really struck by that. And I thought this sort of journey, the interior transition, the changes to your whole notion of self and time and all of that, this is just as significant as any sort of long-term reporting project that I would do. And so, so once that was sort of, a career realization in terms of this writing is also really significant, but also a personal realization in terms of like, it can be just as powerful to sit in a cabin in Ohio for a year and think as it can be to be in China or Borneo. Trekking, one thing is not necessarily more informative or illuminating than the other. And I had always sort of put the exterior and the sort of footloose above that interior life. So, thanks.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. Just a quick question. Obviously, you've had your first child now. You traveled a lot in your 20s and have had all these formative experiences, and you recognize the value of being in different cultures and, putting yourself out there. Do you anticipate traveling with your child or future children or whatever later on? And, what do you think that will look like, and what do you hope that they will gain and you will gain in that vision of new motherhood?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a really important value for both my husband and I, that we really want Elena, our daughter, to grow up with that appreciation of travel and of being different places. And of, she's my husband is from Oaxaca, Mexico, so we really want her to stay connected to that culture and that background and that history. That's really important for us. But also, I feel like just learning how to be in the world as a traveler and how to be open to new experiences and new foods and new places is a value that I really want to give to her. So, right now is the question of how to sort of best organize our lives to do that. But I remember from my traveling years, the families that I met who traveled long term were always just sort of the most relaxed, open-minded, interesting people. And I always thought, if I have a kid, I absolutely want her to be able to get on a long distance bus and go for 10 hours and eat whatever is sold from a basket and, be able to just roll with that and appreciate that. So yeah, that's a definite family value. Thanks. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your process? Do you just sit down and write? Do you outline? Do you write a little bit here and then a little bit there, not time-wise, but idea-wise? Or
yeah,
what exactly do you do?
So for this book, I'm realizing now, unfortunately, that it is different for every project. So there is I wish there was a set method. But for this book, what I really did was I wrote, I would write in big spurts when I had the time, and I would sort of write out everything that I was thinking. And then I would also take a lot of notes from books or from research that I did and compile all those. And then I literally went in and cut all of them up into 1,000 tiny little scraps and made a huge mosaic of that, and sat down and then tried to sort of literally staple together all the threads that sort of connected, and then work those into essays. And then once the book sold, and then they did the whole editing process, then a lot of the editing was sort of tightening that up and moving things around once more and getting the chronology in place and whatnot. But I would say sort of writing it all out and then cutting all those snippets up and really playing a lot with the structure and with getting everything in the proper place.
I have a question, because you obviously have a supportive family and you are living in this rural environment. I'm in my 60s, and I feel like a generation prior to mine, women who are having children had the support of an extended family. There were aunts and grandmothers and people who sort of passed down this kind of wisdom. You didn't get it out of a book, you got it from family members. Yeah. And I just wonder if, for your generation, how did that work for you? Did you feel that was helpful and supportive? Did you feel it was intrusive?
No, that was tremendously helpful and instrumental to how I thought about pregnancy and how I went through my pregnancy. And, I have a really close relationship with my parents. And, in the book, one of the instrumental moments is I really do struggle in the first trimester with how to do this. And I'm sort of overwhelmed by the transition. And my stepmother really comes through and says to me, this will change your life. It will change it completely. But, can you live with that or not, essentially? And so, the book is full of those moments of sort of coming to them. And they are incredible in the sense that they never told me, oh, you need to do this or you shouldn't do this. And they always sort of gave the choice to me. But just having them there and the force of them listening and sort of, guiding me at the opportune moments was really critical. I also have a very close relationship with my dad and sort of grew up with him. So he is a key figure in here. And his sort of attitude about child rearing and about, what it can teach you and the sort of bigger philosophical questions really informed a lot of my parenting. So that was, that absolutely not only shaped my life, but my daughter's life. She's with my parents right now out there. So yeah, that was a huge, huge deal. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you.